It is now, as David lies near death, that Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, approaches the frail king's bedside.
And she said unto him, My lord, you swore to your servant by the Lord your God, saying, Your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and shall sit on my throne. 1 Kings 1:17.
Even though Solomon is not first in line to inherit the throne, David accedes to Bathsheba's wishes. Too sick to rule, David proclaims Solomon king.
It was a heavy task for the young prince, for Israel was a great nation. But his father reminded him that the Lord would give him wisdom and understanding. David said, There is much work for you to do, my son. But above all, don't forget to walk in God's ways and obey his commandments. It was a happy day for the people of Israel when Solomon was made king. Trumpets blew and the people shouted. Solomon was a good king, and remembering his father's words, he asked God to guide him. One night, the Lord appeared to Solomon and said, Ask what I shall give thee. Solomon was filled with wonder, but he didn't hesitate. He told the Lord he wanted to be a good, upright king like his father David. But he didn't know how to rule a great nation. So he asked God to give him wisdom to do what was right. God was pleased when Solomon asked for wisdom rather than riches, and promised him great wisdom and an understanding heart. God also promised to bless Solomon with honor and wealth if he obeyed his commandments. Solomon realized that truly the Lord had spoken to him, and he praised God. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom and understanding, he said. King Solomon was talked about in all the land because he was kind and just, wiser than any king before him, and all his people were happy.
Guided by Solomon's wisdom, the nation of Israel experienced an era of peace and tranquility never before known. Assuming, however, that what the Bible tells us is true, and Solomon did transform his kingdom with an amazing amount of construction, what would be the verdict of history? According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon builds fortifications throughout Israel, where he can provision his armies and guard strategic trade routes. But it is in the glittering capital city of Jerusalem where he embarks on his most ambitious project, an extravagant palace that contains within it the Holy Temple.
And he built the inner court with 3 rows of hewed stone, and a row of cedar beams. And he carved thereon cherubim, and palm trees, and open flowers, and covered them with gold. 1 Kings 6:36.
The walls of his holy temple were said to be lined with the purest gold.
In the distant court of Sheba in southern Arabia, merchants told their queen of the wealth and wisdom of Solomon. But she could hardly believe their stories. She wanted to see for herself. So she traveled 1,000 miles across the harsh desert, followed by camels, bearing gifts for the king, gold, spices, and jewels. At last she stood in Solomon's magnificent court. There were many things she wanted to see, many questions she wanted to ask this wise man. Solomon showed her the temple where his people worshiped God, and took her to see his palace. As the Queen of Sheba sat at Solomon's table and listened to him, she realized that his people loved and served him because he was a wise and good king. She said, Happy are thy men. Happy are these thy servants that hear thy wisdom.
And yet, beneath the surface of Solomon's achievements lay a darker truth. For while he may have turned his dreams into reality, they were realized at a terrible price.
Solomon even went so far as to conscript labor and take people away from their farms and destroy village life so that he could get these massive building projects off the ground.
According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon would become one of ancient Israel's mightiest kings, gifted with powers beyond those of mortal men. With his wisdom now legendary, Solomon takes up the reins of leadership with commanding authority. In a deft maneuver to expand his power base, he enters into diplomatic alliances with rulers throughout the Middle East.
One of the ways that you sealed relationships with foreign countries is through marriage.
The Bible tells us that Solomon accumulates 700 wives and 300 concubines. Many have asked, are these astonishing numbers an exaggeration?
He probably didn't marry all those women any more than he had all those mountains of gold.
Criticism of Solomon's many affairs is also implicit in biblical accounts, as is his habit of building chapels for his foreign wives, so they can continue to worship their own pagan gods.
It's a ticking bomb. Sooner or later, it's got to go off, and there has to be an indictment of Solomon, because his heart does get led astray by those wives and their idols. This is a man who supposedly had a harem consisting of 1,000 women. Where are all the kids? Where's all the little pitter-patter of thousands of feet around the palace? There's something dead and sterile about his romances. They don't issue in children.
Seemingly unaware of his own disturbing flaws, Solomon embarks on an ambitious building program that will become the talk of the ancient world. By almost every standard, he seems a king at the very peak of his power. And yet, it is now, as Solomon starts to turn his grandiose plans into reality, that some scholars see the seeds of his crushing downfall. What does seem certain is that King Solomon does not end his life a happy or fulfilled man. Ecclesiastes, a book in the Bible characterized by its haunting lament.
To everything there is a season, a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck that which is planted. Ecclesiastes 3:2.
It seems to me that the book of Ecclesiastes represents all of us in our moments of bitterness, in our moments of wondering if all of life is just vanity.
Strangely, in his last days, a figure enters Solomon's life who has never before been mentioned in the Bible. It is Rehoboam, a son from one of Solomon's many wives. All that history tells us is that Solomon names him his successor to the throne. Solomon spends his last days alone in the magnificent palace he built for himself. His reign was marked by 40 years of peace and tranquility. Why is it then that shortly after Solomon's death, the United Kingdom of Israel is rocked by political turmoil? Some scholars hold Solomon personally responsible for the breakup of the 12 tribes of Israel.
He became enamored of his own power and his own reach and his own possibilities and potential. And in the end, he forgot that he was a fallible human being, that he was accountable primarily to God and to the people. And so he left a legacy that did great harm to Israel.
The tragedy of King Solomon strikes a universal and haunting chord. Perhaps no other human being has been blessed with such a deep and abiding wisdom. By relying on this divine insight, Solomon managed to build Israel into a mighty nation that awed the ancient world for a generation. And yet, somehow he lost his way. Caught up in all of his worldly accomplishments, Solomon lost sight of the needs of the common man. The shining promise of his youth was never realized. Wisdom without compassion can be a dangerous tool. In his hunger for greatness, Solomon was to abuse his God-given gift and see it turn with disastrous effect against not only his own people, but also against himself.